I'm Florence Hale. I'm 71 years old, and once upon a time I designed homes for people who called them dreams. Now I live in one of those homes, alone. Not because I wanted to be, but because I learned, the hard way, that silence is the first thing they erase you with. That evening, I sat upright on the velvet chair in my own living room, dressed in a deep navy wrap dress. My late husband Charles used to say it made me look like dignity itself. The same room where Ivy used to open Christmas presents in flannel pajamas, where Daniel once toasted my apple pie with expensive wine. Now it echoed like a courtroom. Next to me was Judge Lee, a longtime friend of my late husband. His presence was silent but solid, like an ancient oak. He laid the sealed documents on the coffee table slowly, methodically, as if placing stones on a grave. Just then, the front door burst open. Laughter, clinking glass, and the smug rhythm of high heels on imported oak. Dom Perignon, chilled to perfection, Daniel announced, hoisting the bottle like a trophy. Ivy followed behind, still radiant, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Mom would have loved this view one last time, she said, glancing toward the terrace. Champagne, sunset, and their silent farewell to me. Then they saw me, still, breathing, present, their faces drained of color, frozen mid-celebration. I'm sorry to interrupt your toast, I said calmly, but I believe you've forgotten one guest, the rightful owner of this estate. Daniel's jaw locked. Ivy blinked once, twice. Judge Lee opened the envelope and placed the court order on the table, heavy and undeniable. A moment of silence, not mourning, recognition. They had called it a farewell getaway. But when they came home to celebrate, I was sitting there, with the judge, and a court order they never saw coming. If you're still here, you already feel the tension in the room, don't you? That quiet kind of betrayal. The one that doesn't scream, but lingers like perfume on a lie. Stay with me. What happened before this moment? The champagne, the villa, the whispers in the night will explain why I stopped being silent and why sometimes justice only needs one woman to remember everything. Let's go back to the beginning. I met Charles Hale when I was just 22, fresh out of architecture school, clutching rolled blueprints and dreams too big for my tiny studio apartment. He was already building his empire, Hale Estates, a man with vision, charm, and a smile that could disarm even the sharpest skeptics. I wasn't intimidated. I was intrigued. When he asked me, 2 weeks after we met, what my dream home looked like, I described it in obsessive detail. The vaulted ceilings, the south-facing light, the garden that would bloom lavender and rosemary year-round. He listened, and a year later, he built it. For us. That house was more than concrete and design. It was the first canvas we painted together, the place where Ivy took her first steps on the marble foyer, where we marked her height on the pantry wall with pencil lines and quiet pride. I didn't just design our home, I was its soul. I filled it with warmth, with weekends of homemade sourdough, Sunday jazz, and the scent of lemon wood polish. I believed, with every brick, that this house would be the place I would grow old, loved, and remembered. Charles passed away 9 years ago, a quiet heart attack in his study. I was out planting thyme when the housekeeper ran out to find me. Grief moved in that day, heavy and slow. It settled in the spaces Charles used to fill. The breakfast nook, the library, the side of the bed that stayed untouched. Everyone came to the memorial. Everyone praised his legacy. Only a few remembered that I was part of building it. In the months that followed, Ivy visited less and less. I told myself she was busy, newly married, career-focused. I left her voice messages, baked her favorite cardamom cookies whenever I heard she might come by. But the space between her visits grew longer, her hugs grew shorter, her words more clipped. Daniel, her husband, never really looked at me, not the way Charles used to, with respect. With Daniel, there was always this invisible transaction hanging in the air, as if he were waiting for the moment when I would become a loose end he could tie up. He had charm, the practiced kind. Daniel said all the right things during the engagement, called me Mom Florence, with a smirk, not warmth. At the wedding, he gave a toast about inheriting not just a daughter, but a family legacy. I should have listened more closely. At the time, I smiled, thinking he meant love. I didn't realize he meant assets. After Charles passed, the estate passed to me, everything legally mine. But I was never a woman who clutched power. I maintained what we had, honored the staff, paid the taxes, kept the foundation donations going, just as Charles would have. I told Ivy often that one day this would be hers, our way of continuing the Hale name. I had no idea she would try to take it before I was ready to let go, or that she'd allow someone else to orchestrate it. Ivy wasn't always this distant. When she was little, she'd crawl into our bed after nightmares, clutching a stuffed giraffe and asking me to hum. Her favorite song was always Moon River. She had Charles's smile and my stubbornness. In high school, she called me her best friend, the one person who understood her without needing explanation. But somewhere between her MBA and her marriage, something shifted. She stopped asking for my advice. Then she stopped caring for it altogether. Daniel started suggesting changes. First small. We should redo the guest wing. Then bolder. You don't need all this space, Florence. At first I laughed it off. I thought he was trying to modernize things. But one afternoon I overheard him on a call while walking past the pool house. Once we secure the retreat plans, everything else falls into place. She won't even see it coming. The tone in his voice wasn't business. It was conquest. Still, I doubted myself. What kind of mother suspects her own child of betrayal? I told myself I was being paranoid. I blamed my loneliness, the echoes in the hallway, the silence that lingered longer than it used to. I even started seeing a therapist, secretly, just to make sure I wasn't unraveling. She told me I was grieving. I told her I was haunted by something deeper, the feeling that I was being slowly erased, not by time, but by design. Then came the suggestion, a weekend getaway. Just the three of us. Ivy said it was to celebrate Mom. Daniel called it a soft transition. They picked a luxury villa 2 hours outside the city, secluded, minimalist, serene. The brochure had words like reset and legacy planning. I should have known, but I wanted to believe. I wanted to believe my daughter still saw me as her mother, not just a stumbling block to her ambitions. So I said yes. I packed my softest cashmere. I brought the photo album with Ivy's baby pictures, and I left my house, the house I had designed, the one I built with love and memory, in their hands, with nothing more than a wave and a prayer. When I returned, nothing was the same. My bedroom had been cleared out, my belongings boxed. The staff had been given new instructions. My keys didn't fit the front door anymore, and Ivy, standing beside Daniel, didn't flinch when she said, "It's not your place anymore, Mom." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I smiled. Because I remembered who I was. I had been the foundation of that house, and even the prettiest facades collapse when you forget what holds them up. Ivy always used to glow, not in the way lights do, but like warmth rising off a childhood memory. She had a laugh that bubbled up from her chest, big brown eyes that used to search mine for reassurance. She clung to me during thunderstorms, danced barefoot in the rain with muddy knees, and left notes on my pillow that said things like, "Mom, you're my home." I believed her, every word. Now she shimmered in curated lighting, in expensive fabrics that moved like liquid, in press photos with titles beneath her name, Strategic Director, Hale Global Ventures. Her glow hadn't dimmed, but it was polished now, rehearsed. She knew how to hold a champagne flute in one hand and a leveraged acquisition plan in the other. She was impressive. and sometimes, when she turned her head just right, I could still see my little girl. But most days, I only saw someone I didn't fully recognize. I tried to be proud. I told friends she was doing well. Better than we could have dreamed. I kept her childhood room untouched for years. I still had her ballet slippers in a velvet-lined box. But the truth was, Ivy had become fluent in a language I no longer spoke, and Daniel had become her interpreter. He was the kind of man who filled a room with confidence just by walking in. Perfect posture, tailored suits, an effortless grin. But there was something about his eyes. They never stayed long enough. When he looked at me, it was the way dealers at antique auctions examine a rare piece, not with affection, but with silent valuation. I often felt like he was doing the math on my life before I even spoke. At dinners, he'd compliment my roast chicken, but never ask for the recipe. He'd pull out my chair, but his conversation would steer toward boardrooms, partnerships, and asset fluidity. When Charles was alive, he would engage Daniel in long debates about business ethics and legacy. I usually stayed quiet, slicing fruit for dessert or topping off the wine. Now, without Charles, I found myself invisible at my own table, a relic from a previous administration. One afternoon, Daniel dropped by alone. He rarely did that. I was pruning the roses, dirt under my nails, sun on my shoulders. He stood on the patio in spotless shoes, talking on his phone for an extra minute before acknowledging me. When he finally did, it was with a smile so smooth it nearly slipped off his face. "We've been thinking, Florence," he said, pacing slowly. "You've done an incredible job maintaining the estate all these years. But maybe it's time to consider transitions." I paused, hands still in the soil. "Transitions?" "A soft shift," he said, kneeling, not to speak to me, but to pinch a bloom from the bush. "A weekend retreat. You, Ivy, and me. Just to realign, reflect on where the legacy is heading. She wants to celebrate you, really celebrate." That word rolled off his tongue like sugar, laced with something sour. I didn't answer right away. I watched him roll the rose stem between his fingers like a magician hiding something behind a handkerchief. "She says you've been a little lonely lately," he added gently. "This could be a meaningful goodbye to an era. A moment to honor the past and clear the way for the future." I swallowed hard. The phrase, "goodbye to an era," stuck in my throat. I wondered then if he was offering me closure or erasure. That night, Ivy called. Her tone was lighter, almost playful. "Daniel told me he talked to you. Isn't it a beautiful idea? The villa is serene. No emails, just the three of us." A way to reconnect, I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell her I didn't need a curated moment. I needed my daughter, but instead, I heard myself say, "It sounds lovely, sweetheart." Because even though Daniel's words felt off, Ivy's voice, for a flicker of a second, sounded like it used to. And I held on to that flicker. I told myself maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was being oversensitive. Maybe this was a chance to breathe again with my daughter by my side. I laid out my shawl, packed Charles's old watch. I even brought a bottle of sherry Ivy used to sneak sips of when she was 15. I was preparing for nostalgia, not war. The morning of the retreat, Daniel arrived with a black SUV, driver in uniform. He handled my bags like a concierge, held open the door with precision. Ivy kissed my cheek, quick, cool. "You look nice, Mom." I smiled, nodded, and slid into the back seat. As we drove away from the estate, the house I'd poured my soul into, I turned back once. The roof glinted in the morning sun like it always did. The garden swayed gently, and I felt, for the first time in years, like a guest in my own story. The night before the retreat, I moved through my home as if touching it for the last time. My hands lingered on door frames, polished wood, the edge of a window pane Charles and I had once installed ourselves during a spring renovation. It had been his idea to let light flood the hallway. "If we build with light," he said, "we never forget who we are." That was Charles, a builder in more ways than one. He built this estate with me. Not just brick and glass, but every inch of soul it held. That night, it felt like the walls remembered. I didn't pack much. A few shawls, a linen dress or two, flat shoes for walking, the pearl earrings Ivy gave me when she graduated. As I folded my clothes into the suitcase, my eyes drifted toward the top shelf of my closet. There, tucked beneath an old cashmere sweater, was Charles's leather-bound notebook, the one with the brass clasp and frayed spine. I hadn't touched it in years. It wasn't filled with numbers or property maps like his work journals were. This one held his personal thoughts, the kind he didn't share at board meetings or fundraisers. I climbed the step stool, reached up, and pulled it down. Dust rose from its cover like breath. I hesitated, then slid it gently into the side pocket of my bag. I didn't know why exactly, just that if I was going to that retreat, to say goodbye, as Daniel called it, I wanted Charles close. That night, I slept lightly, as if my body knew it was the last time I'd rest without suspicion. Morning came soft and gray. I made tea, watered the orchids, and fed the cat that wandered over from the neighbor's yard each dawn. Ivy had named her Whiskers as a child, but now only I remembered that. When the car arrived, I stood in the doorway for a long minute, scanning the rooms. Everything looked as it should, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. The driver took my suitcase. Daniel was already seated in the back of the SUV, typing something on his phone. Ivy sat beside him, sunglasses too large for her face, hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked flawless. She always did lately. "You okay, Mom?" she asked, her tone light. I nodded. Yes. Just taking it in. We drove for miles. The city gave way to rolling hills, then to winding roads lined with pines. Ivy chatted about the spa treatments they'd booked, how the villa had a terrace that overlooked the cliffs, how no phones were allowed. Total disconnect, Mom. You'll love it. I smiled faintly. I didn't mention that Charles and I had once looked at land in that very area, long before Ivy was born. Back then, we dreamed of building a second home there, a sanctuary for when the world grew loud. We never did. Life got in the way. Or maybe we just decided our real sanctuary was always each other. The road curved sharply. As we climbed higher, I glanced at the notebook in my lap. I remembered the last time Charles had opened it. It was a rainy afternoon, months before he passed. We were in his study, sipping strong coffee, watching drops race down the window. "I've been thinking about the will," he said. "If anything ever happens to me," I interrupted. "Don't talk like that." But he continued, gentle but firm. "Florence, don't ever trust people with power they haven't earned. And never, never entrust a legacy to flesh. Entrust it to law. Paper trails don't lie. People do." He had smiled then, slid the notebook toward me, and added, "This little thing has more truth in it than half the boardrooms I've sat in." I hadn't understood the weight of that moment until much later. Now, sitting in the back seat beside my daughter and her husband, I felt the truth settle like cold metal in my chest. We arrived just before sunset. The villa was beautiful, exactly as Ivy described. Clean lines, open spaces, the kind of place that makes you feel like you're standing inside a magazine spread. But I felt none of the serenity I was promised. Instead, I felt like an actress entering a stage already set for her final scene. Daniel gave the staff precise instructions. Ivy floated from room to room, pointing out details. I followed quietly, my fingers grazing railings, fabrics, picture frames. I wasn't looking for comfort. I was looking for intent. That evening, we dined on the terrace. A private chef served risotto and grilled vegetables with lemon zest. Champagne was poured. "To legacy," Daniel said, raising his glass. Ivy joined in. I clinked mine gently, said nothing. The sun dipped into the sea like a curtain being drawn. It was beautiful, but all I could hear was Charles. "Don't entrust your legacy to people. he had said. Entrust it to the law. And for the first time in a very long time, I wondered if my silence had gone on too long. The villa sat beside a still lake that mirrored the sky in shades of rose and lavender. It was almost too perfect, like a backdrop for a catalog shoot rather than a real place. That evening, we sat together on the patio, Daniel, Ivy, and I, watching the water shimmer beneath the falling sun. The staff had laid out a modest spread of cheeses and figs, and someone had poured glasses of deep red wine into long, delicate stems. A breeze came off the lake, cool, enough to lift the ends of Ivy's silk scarf and send a few leaves tumbling down from the vine above us. I held the glass in my hand but didn't drink right away. I let the aroma rise, rich and aged. But beneath the fruit and oak, there was something metallic, something too sharp. I took a small sip to be polite and then set it down. Daniel, ever the conversationalist, leaned back with practiced ease. "Isn't this the kind of peace we all deserve?" he said, his gaze turned toward the horizon, but his words were aimed at me. "It's beautiful," I replied quietly. He nodded, then waited, always waiting for silence to open a door he could step into. "You know, Florence," he began, swirling the wine gently, "Ivy and I have been thinking a lot about what's next. For the family, for you," I turned to look at him. Ivy reached for a grape and placed it delicately in her mouth, not meeting my eyes. "We just think," he continued, "that maybe it's time you fully relax. No more estate paperwork, no more meetings with lawyers or fund managers. Let us take care of everything so you can simply enjoy your days." My hand stayed resting on the wine glass, unmoving. "I haven't felt overworked," I said, voice measured. Daniel smiled. "Of course. But at a certain point, legacy management becomes a burden, and you've done more than your share. You built this life. Maybe it's time to let us carry it forward." Ivy laughed, a soft, brittle sound. "Daniel just wants to take care of you, Mom." There was something in her tone, an attempt at lightness that fell flat. "I didn't know I needed taking care of," I replied, offering a smile that didn't touch my eyes. Daniel raised his glass again. "To peace of mind," he said. I didn't join the toast. That night, I retired early. I claimed fatigue from the drive and the change of scenery. Ivy offered to bring me tea, but I declined. I wanted solitude more than chamomile. The room they'd assigned to me was on the far end of the villa, separate from the master suite and just above the kitchen. It was tastefully decorated in cream tones, with soft lighting and thick curtains. Too perfect again, like someone had been instructed to design a room that said, "We care about you," without meaning it. I changed into my nightgown, sat at the small desk by the window, and opened Charles's notebook. I hadn't looked inside since arriving. I thumbed through his familiar handwriting, slanted, neat, sometimes interrupted by sudden sketches of buildings or plans. On one page he'd written, "The walls we build are sometimes for shelter." Other times, for warning, I underlined it with a pencil I found in the drawer. I was halfway through a paragraph when I heard a faint noise behind me. Not loud, but enough to draw my attention. A creak, then another. I turned toward the closet. Nothing. But something in the air had changed. I rose and approached my suitcase, which I'd left zipped and placed under the vanity. It had been moved. Just slightly, but enough for me to know. I knelt and checked the zippers. The front pouch had been opened and closed again, but not in the way I'd left it. My silk scarf was out of place, crumpled instead of folded. More tellingly, the notebook had shifted from the side pocket to the middle one. Someone had gone through my belongings. I closed my eyes, breathing in through my nose. Slow, controlled. I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I stood up, re-zipped everything, and returned to the desk. Later, I turned out the light and lay down. But I didn't sleep. I listened. To footsteps in the hallway, to the occasional whisper of the wind against the glass, to the distant laughter echoing from the patio where Ivy and Daniel remained, their voices muffled by the night. They thought I was already fading, that I wouldn't notice, that the woman who once drafted blueprints in her sleep could no longer read between the lines. They were wrong. The lake outside was still, but beneath the surface, I knew. Something was moving. The villa had gone quiet, save for the faint hum of crickets outside and the rhythmic creaking of old wood settling into the cool night air. I couldn't sleep. After discovering my suitcase had been searched, I found myself on edge, restless in a way I hadn't felt in years. I slipped into a cardigan and walked softly down the hallway past closed doors and shadowed corners toward the kitchen. I needed tea, or perhaps just a sense of normalcy. To my surprise, I found Ivy already there, barefoot perched on a bar stool by the marble island, cradling a mug of something herbal between her palms. Her silk robe shimmered under the pendant lights, and her hair was loosely tied, giving her the softness I hadn't seen in years. She looked up, startled at first, then gave me a weary smile. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. I shook my head. "Too many thoughts." "Same." She gestured to the kettle, still warm. "There's chamomile if you want some." I poured myself a cup, taking my time. When I finally sat across from her, there was a long silence, but it wasn't cold, just cautious. "You used to come into my room in the middle of the night," I said finally, "when you had nightmares. You'd sit at the foot of my bed and ask me what happens after we die." She let out a breath of laughter tinged with surprise. "I did?" "All the time," I nodded. "You always wanted reassurance that love didn't disappear, that it went somewhere, held us together, even if we couldn't see it." She stared down into her tea, stirring it absently. "I guess I stopped believing that for a while." "Why?" Ivy hesitated. Her shoulders tensed, but she didn't retreat. "I don't know. Maybe after Dad died, everything felt so different. Like you changed. You became more distant. I was grieving," I said, gently. "We both were. I know. But you grieved in silence, Mom. You didn't let me in. Daniel did." There it was, the fracture, the place where she turned toward someone else, because I had gone quiet in my own sorrow. "I never meant to shut you out," I said, "but I was terrified. Of losing him, and then of losing you." She blinked, eyes glistening. "You didn't lose me. Ivy, look at me." She lifted her gaze slowly, eyes rimmed red. "There's been a space between us for a long time. I'm not blaming you, but I feel it. And I think you do too." She nodded barely. "I miss the girl who used to hold my hand at art galleries," I continued, "and argue with me about whether turquoise counts as blue or green. The girl who made Sunday pancakes shaped like animals, just because Ivy's lips twitched, but no smile came. "I'm still here," she whispered, "but things are complicated now." I let the silence return for a moment before asking, "Why did Daniel go through my luggage?" Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. "What?" "Ivy." She looked away. "He was probably looking for something." He said, "He thinks your will is outdated, that some of it might not even be legal anymore." My breath caught, but I kept my tone steady. "And what do you think?" "I don't know," she admitted. "He says the structure of the estate is old-fashioned, that most of the assets should be consolidated under a trust, something more modern and efficient. He said you'd be safer that way." "Safer?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "He means secured. That no one could contest things, that if something happened to you, there wouldn't be confusion." I studied her face, trying to find the child I'd raised. "He's already preparing for when I'm gone?" Ivy bit her lip, clearly unsettled. "That's not what I meant." "But it's what he meant." She didn't deny it. "Ivy," I said quietly, Has it occurred to you that Daniel's concern for efficiency might be about control, not protection? She hesitated again. He's not like that. You used to know when someone was lying. When did you stop trusting your own instincts? She stared at me, a long, uncertain beat. I don't know what to believe anymore. My heart ached. She wasn't cruel, just confused, caught in a current too strong for her to swim out of alone. I never wanted control, I said, only connection. But if you let someone else erase the lines between those things, you won't know what's yours anymore. Not your voice, your legacy, not even your thoughts. Ivy looked as if she might cry, but instead she stood. I should go to bed. I rose with her. Ivy. She turned at the doorway, her face a mix of fatigue and conflict. Good night, Mom. And then she was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of lavender tea and the growing weight of everything unspoken, understood. I will now write Scene 7 of Act 2, The Plan and the Price, exactly 950 words in first-person narration from Florence, adhering strictly to the faceless YouTube format and the outline. Here's the next installment. I woke to silence. No birdsong, no hum of distant conversation. Just a sterile kind of quiet, the kind that prickles at the edges of instinct. I sat up slowly, blinking against the early morning light filtering through the gauzy curtains. The air was too still. When I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and walked to the door, I found it wouldn't open. The handle turned, but only slightly. There was resistance. I tried again, firmer this time. Nothing. I jiggled it, rattled it, leaned my shoulder against the frame, locked, from the outside. At first, I thought it must have been a mistake. Maybe someone had accidentally turned a latch, or there was a safety feature I wasn't aware of. This villa was new to me. A high-end rental Daniel had boasted about on the drive here, calling it a wellness sanctuary built for restoration. I hadn't paid attention then. I was too focused on the tension that lingered behind Ivy's smile. But now I saw it differently. I turned back to the room, my phone, gone. I always left it on the nightstand when I slept. It wasn't there. Neither was my purse. Instead, neatly placed on the small table by the armchair, was a single glass bottle of water with a note tucked beneath it, in Daniel's handwriting. Florence, take today to rest. No distractions. We've got everything handled. Enjoy the quiet. D.A. stared at it. My skin went cold. There was nothing casual about the wording. No distractions didn't sound like kindness. It sounded like isolation, a boundary, a line I wasn't meant to cross. I checked the windows, locked, reinforced glass, the kind you find in luxury properties designed for privacy and control. I pulled at the latches, tested the weight. No give, no escape. I called out, once, twice, louder the third time. Hello, Ivy, Daniel? No answer, just the hollow echo of my voice against the high ceilings. I knocked on the door, hard. Is anyone there? Silence. And then, somewhere beyond the door, faintly, I thought I heard footsteps, retreating. I sat on the edge of the bed, the bottle still untouched in my hand. My heart wasn't racing, but it was sinking. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. They had left me here. Daniel had always been smooth, calculated, the kind of man who could sell you a second story and make you feel like you'd asked for it. He wore respect like cologne, applied heavily, but it didn't last. Over time, it faded, revealing something slick underneath. And Ivy, sweet Ivy, my daughter, my girl. She didn't have this in her heart, not cruelty, but she had confusion, and sometimes confusion makes space for compliance. I walked the room slowly, studying every detail. The water bottle wasn't sealed. That was enough for me not to drink it. I ran my fingers along the baseboards behind the headboard beneath the lip of the desk. No outlets worked. The lamps didn't turn on. I pressed the light switch. Nothing. Power had been cut, selectively. My room was disconnected from the rest of the house. This wasn't just a locked room, it was a controlled environment. There were no personal items, no magazines, no pens, no clocks, just pristine minimalism. Like I'd checked into a curated exhibit titled Aging Matriarch in Holding, and I was the exhibit. Hours passed. The light shifted. Still no voices, no doors opening, no sounds of cooking or cleaning. I paced the room in slow, deliberate lines. I wasn't panicked. I was past panic. Panic is for the unaware. But I was aware now. Something was happening. Outside this room, outside my reach. And I knew Daniel well enough to understand what kind of man needs silence to act. He was moving something. Documents, legal assets, access. He was giving me a day to rest so I wouldn't be able to interfere. And Ivy? Where was she in all this? Did she know I was locked in? Or had she been told I'd requested time alone? That I was sleeping in, meditating, healing? Daniel was clever. He wouldn't tell her everything, just enough to keep her at a distance. I went to the closet. My suitcase was still there, partially zipped, clothes unfolded just like last night. But something was missing. The leather-bound notebook, Charles' notebook, gone. My hands trembled as I touched the empty lining where I had hidden it. I had never told them what it was, only that it belonged to my husband. But Daniel must have guessed, must have seen it as a key to something. And now it was in his hands. He thought I was a relic, a leftover from an older time, a woman past her usefulness. But Charles had known this might happen. He once said, "If power is the house, legacy is the land it's built on. Protect the land, Florence. The house can be rebuilt." And I had. I'd kept copies. I'd safeguarded details. And most importantly, I'd trusted the law, not the people who thought they could manipulate it. They wanted a silent matriarch? They were about to hear my voice, loud and clear, inside a courtroom. But for now, I sat back on the bed, hands folded in my lap, watching the fading light slide across the polished floor. They thought this was a retreat. It was, just not for me. For them. They were retreating. From morality, from respect, from the very foundation this family had been built on. And I was preparing for return. Understood. Below is 8, the silent escape. Cheat kep tok vahavienpin, exactly 900 words, written from Florence's first-person perspective, with full adherence to the tone, pacing, and faceless format style of your approved outline. I sat still for a long time, not frozen, just listening. I had spent my life designing spaces. I understood airflow, insulation, the way sound behaves in enclosed places. This villa was expensive, but even luxury has its patterns. There had to be a vent, somewhere. My eyes scanned the room again, this time not looking for comfort, but for exit points. My hands rested on my lap, then slid into the pockets of my robe, an old habit. That's when I felt them. 2 AA batteries. I always carried them for my little bedside radio. Next to them, my silver hair clip. Heavy, strong. Charles gave it to me on our 20th anniversary, engraved with a barely visible fleur-de-lis. I looked down at those 3 objects in my palm. They weren't tools, not at first glance. But I wasn't looking for obvious solutions. I was looking for leverage. That's what survival is. Not about strength, not about speed, about noticing. I moved to the corner near the armoire and dropped to my knees, feeling along the baseboard with my fingers. The wall was seamless, but there. A slight vibration behind the plaster, a vent about the size of a shoebox, was tucked just above the floor. The slats were narrow, the kind meant for airflow, not access. But I didn't need to crawl through. I just needed to be heard. I removed the batteries, holding one in each hand. Then I twisted the hair clip open until it split into 2 flat prongs. It hurt to bend it. It had been a gift. But what's the use of memory if it can't protect you? I placed one battery on the floor, held the other in my palm, and used the clip to tap them against each other, rhythmically, carefully, like a metronome. Tap, 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 then pause. Tap, 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 tap. I didn't know Morse code, but I knew patterns caught attention, especially in silence. I kept tapping. Every 30 seconds I changed rhythm. Tap, 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 tap. A pause. Then again. There was no guarantee anyone would hear, no certainty anyone was nearby. But I knew from years of working with contractors and estate staff that maintenance teams, especially on high-end properties, often left windows cracked open for airflow or used shared ducts between staff quarters. I kept tapping, and I whispered quietly, in case. "Help, I'm in the guest room, locked inside. I'm Florence Hale. I'm not here by choice." My voice didn't shake. There was no room for panic, just action. I tapped again, switched ends, held the batteries tighter. The metal warmed in my hands. Outside, the sunlight shifted. A bird landed on the ledge outside the window, then flew off again. I watched it go and tapped harder. It was strange, how calm I felt. I wasn't resigned. I wasn't afraid. I was focused. Charles once told me that silence isn't the absence of sound. It's the presence of every choice you haven't made yet. And I was making mine now. After maybe an hour or two, I stopped tapping. My arms were tired. I set the objects down gently, stood, listened, still quiet. But there was a different kind of stillness now. Something had shifted. A breeze moved faintly through the vent, not from the AC, from movement. Someone had turned the system back on. Someone was listening. I stepped closer and whispered again, low but clear. "This is Florence Hale. I've been locked inside this room. Please, tell someone. Call the authorities. I'm not sick. I'm not resting. I am being held." I didn't expect an answer, and none came. But I heard something else. A faint click from the hallway. Not loud, almost like the sound of a doorknob being tested, then quietly released. I stepped back and waited. Nothing happened, but I knew now I wasn't alone anymore. Someone had heard, and Daniel. Daniel had underestimated me. They thought a locked door would make me powerless. They forgot who built this house, who designed every corner to carry sound, every room to open into another. They thought I would sit and wait. I had been sitting, but I was not waiting. I gathered the batteries and clip, placed them back in my robe, and smoothed my hair. My breath was steady. My spine was straight. There was no breakdown, no scream. Just a woman in a locked room, sending out a signal. Not for rescue, for recognition. Because sometimes you don't escape through the door. You escape through the echo. I was released quietly. No headlines, no confrontations. Just the sound of a key turning in a lock, the door swinging open, and the eyes of a young maintenance worker who looked as startled as I felt composed. He didn't say much, just nodded, as if he knew something had been wrong, but not what. "Thank you," I whispered, stepping past him without looking back. The air outside stung a little, sunlight too bright after a day in shadows. But I didn't flinch. I walked toward the waiting car I had arranged through a friend's company, a favor owed. The driver opened the door, and I gave him one name: Wendell Hargrove. His eyes met mine in the mirror. No questions, just the click of the gear shift, and we pulled away from the retreat. Wendell had been Charles's personal attorney for nearly 3 decades, a quiet, methodical man who read everything twice, trusted no digital file unless it was encrypted by hand, and still typed notes on a Selectric 3. He wore beige suits like a second skin and had a voice like worn leather, calm, warm, but never careless. When Charles passed, Wendell was one of the few who sat with me in silence, not filling the room with condolences, but holding the air steady enough for grief to breathe. We hadn't spoken in nearly 2 years, not since Ivy and Daniel insisted on modernizing all legal matters, and moved everything to the firm's newer partners, young men with firm handshakes and empty eyes. I didn't object then. Maybe part of me wanted to believe in the future they promised. But that morning, I called Wendell directly. The line rang once. "Florence," he said before I even introduced myself. "I need to see you," I said, "in person." And privately, his pause was brief. "My office in 1 hour." "Bring nothing digital," I did as he said. Arriving at the law building felt like entering a chapel I hadn't prayed in for years. The same stone steps, the same brass nameplate beside the wooden door. The air smelled of paper, dust, and something older, something trusted. Wendell stood when I entered. He hadn't aged much, though his shoulders had curved slightly forward, as if time now rested heavier across his back. He didn't ask why I'd come. He simply gestured to the leather armchair across from his desk. I sat, my hands folded neatly in my lap. He poured tea, not coffee. He remembered. "I was locked in a room, Wendell," I said quietly. "No phone, no food. Daniel arranged it. Ivy knew. And they're trying to erase me." His eyes didn't widen, just narrowed, slowly, like a curtain being drawn. "They've claimed you signed over full power of attorney," he said flatly, "that you agreed to dissolve Charles's estate into a trust controlled by them both." "I signed nothing of the sort," I replied, "and I believe they altered files." He nodded once, reached under his desk, and withdrew a thick envelope, sealed in wax, ribbon-tied. "Then Charles was right to prepare for this," he said. I stared at it. "He left this with me the year before his diagnosis," Wendell continued, "a sealed copy of his will, untraceable through the firm's modern systems. Not digital, not scanned, filed independently, off record. He instructed me to hold it until either you requested it in person or until I heard you'd been legally declared incapacitated. Only then would I investigate." My throat tightened. He knew? He suspected. Wendell's voice softened. He loved Ivy, but he worried about the men who might orbit her. And he knew legacies attract shadows. I reached out and took the envelope. My fingers trembled, not from weakness but weight, the kind of weight only truth carries. "I need this made public," I said. "It will be," Wendell replied, "but not yet." "Timing matters, Florence. They've shown their hands too soon. If we move now, they'll spin the narrative, say you're fragile, say you're grieving poorly." I looked up. "Then what do we do?" He leaned forward. "We let them celebrate. Let them believe you've disappeared. Let them believe they've won." He slid a second document across the desk, a notarized affidavit. It confirmed that I had never signed over power of attorney, that I remained the sole executor of Charles's estate, pending any challenge. "Consider this your shield," he said. "And the will?" "Our sword," he said simply. I exhaled slowly. Not relief, something deeper, a kind of reconnection to myself. Charles once told me, "Paper outlives betrayal." But only if you know where to keep it. I kept it here, in a man who still used wax seals. I left Wendell's office, with the envelope in my handbag, sealed like a heartbeat. Outside, the city hummed unaware, but I walked differently now, not as a woman erased, as a woman written back in. That night, I couldn't sleep. Even with the sealed will now in my hands, my body refused to rest. There was a knot inside me, not of fear, but of calculation. I knew Daniel. He wasn't the kind of man who left loose ends. He would have a story prepared, a paper trail curated. If I simply showed up with Wendell's copy and a calm face, he'd smile through it and say, "That's an old version." "She's confused. We updated everything months ago." The truth isn't always louder. Sometimes it whispers. You just have to know where to lean in. I reached into my handbag and pulled out the leather notebook, Charles's notebook. I had carried it without opening it, as if just having it near was enough. But now, in the quiet of my bedroom, I needed more than sentiment. I needed strategy. The cover was worn soft, the kind of leather that darkens with touch and memory. Charles had used this notebook for sketches, quick notes, fragments of ideas that never made it into formal documents. He said ink was how his mind breathed. Flipping through, I found doodles of garden layouts, measurements of a fireplace we never built, a quote from Steinbeck underlined twice. And now that you don't have to be perfect, you can be good. I smiled at that. Charles never expected me to be perfect, only present, only real. Then, toward the back, a single line written in his unmistakable script, clean, angled, deliberate. If anyone ever tampers with this legacy, go to Judge Lee. I trust no one more. My heart paused. Judge Lee. Of course. He and Charles had known each other since the days before the company even had a name. They'd shared a dorm at university. Lee officiated our wedding. And when Charles was drafting his first will, long before Ivy was even born, it was Lee he consulted, not just for legality, but for wisdom. They didn't speak often in later years, but whenever Charles grew quiet after a business meeting or a family dinner, he'd sometimes say, "I should check in on Lee. He still knows the difference between power and principle." I closed the notebook, gripping it tightly. I knew where to go next. I didn't call. I wrote a letter, handwritten, signed only with my full name in the corner. No details, just a request for tea, just like the old days. 2 mornings later, a car arrived. No chauffeur, just a folded note on the dashboard. "Florence, the garden gate is unlocked." -L quote. His house was modest. Ivy once called it outdated, but to me it always felt deliberate. The front porch was painted soft gray, and the garden smelled like rosemary and soil. He opened the door before I knocked. "Come in," he said, his voice exactly as I remembered it. Measured, steady, like water over stone. I stepped inside. He didn't ask why I was there. He simply pointed to the kitchen table, already set with 2 cups, a small teapot, and slices of orange pound cake. We sat. We poured. We sipped. Then I reached into my handbag and placed Charles's notebook on the table, opened it to the line. Judge Lee read it once, then again. When he finally looked up, he didn't speak. He simply nodded. "I believe," I said slowly, "that Charles left more than instructions. I believe he left me a lifeline." "He did," Judge Lee said softly. "He always said you were the only one who understood both the house and the foundation." I exhaled, then told him everything about the retreat, the locked door, the forged documents, the sudden push to erase my signature from all records. He listened without interruption, eyes narrowing only when I mentioned the attempted replacement of the original will. When I finished, he set down his cup and leaned forward. "Florence, I can't act publicly. Not yet, but I can begin verifying the document Wendell holds. I can confirm chain of custody. I can prepare a private review, quiet, legal, unshakable. And when you decide it's time, I will stand beside you." I didn't cry, but I felt something uncoil in my chest. Relief, yes, but more than that, reinforcement. I wasn't alone anymore. "Thank you," I whispered. He smiled faintly. "Charles trusted very few people, but he trusted you more than any paper or signature. He knew you'd know when it was time." As I left, he handed me a small folded envelope. "For when the moment arrives," he said. Inside was his private judicial seal, a simple stamp, but more powerful than any threat Daniel could ever draft. In that moment, I understood something Charles had always believed. The law was never about shouting louder. It was about knowing when silence had weight. I arrived just before the cameras did. The city looked the same, yet everything felt surreal. familiar streets blurred by betrayal, buildings I had once helped finance, built upon foundations I once reviewed line by line, now towering like indifferent witnesses to what had happened. The hotel ballroom was pristine. Of course it was. Daniel would never let a wrinkle show. It was one of our oldest properties where Charles and I had hosted our 20th anniversary gala, a place of real memories, now hijacked for a performance. I stayed across the street in a private suite, my presence unknown, obscured behind tinted windows. Judge Lee had insisted I remain invisible until the court filing was ready. I agreed, but he didn't say I couldn't watch. The event had been framed as a celebration of life and legacy in honor of Florence Hale. The invitation said I had gone missing during a private family retreat. No details, just tragic circumstances. I saw my name engraved in silver on ivory cardstock. I saw my face, an old photo taken from a real estate journal decades ago, framed by lilies and white roses in the lobby display. It was the same photo used when I was awarded the city's Women in Leadership honor. I used to like that picture. Now it looked like a gravestone. At 6 p.m., they began to arrive. Executives, partners, Ivy's colleagues, foundation donors, reporters. No one questioned anything. Tragedy draws polite silence, and wealth draws quicker acceptance. The first thing I noticed was Ivy. She looked like a ghost of herself. Her makeup was flawless, but her eyes were dimmed, as if someone had turned the light off from inside. She wore a fitted black dress, tailored perfectly, but too severe for her frame. It was a dress for mourning, not remembering. Her arms hung stiffly at her sides, her heels too high for comfort. And yet no one around her noticed. Or if they did, they said nothing. She stood beside Daniel, who wore navy blue. Never black, he once said, because black made him look less approachable. He held a glass of champagne and a printed speech. The podium lights hit his cheekbones as he stepped up and cleared his throat. Cameras rolled. A projector beamed a soft slideshow behind him. Photos of me with Ivy as a child, me at company events, me cutting ribbons in hard hats. Daniel paused dramatically. Then he began. Tonight, we gather not only to remember Florence Hale, he said, voice low and reverent, but to honor a woman whose strength, vision, and devotion built more than just a company. She built a legacy. He paused again, blinked, theatrically, and let his lower lip tremble. I lost a mother-in-law. But more than that, I lost a mentor, a light. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a silk handkerchief, and dabbed at eyes that held no moisture. People murmured words of agreement. Someone sniffled. He continued. I want to promise you tonight, he said, that Ivy and I will carry on Florence's mission. We will preserve Hale Estates in her spirit. We will remain guided by her values. Ivy flinched. Not dramatically, just enough that I, watching from across the street on a muted screen, saw her fingers clutch the side of her dress. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She didn't smile. She stood like a statue carved of guilt. Then came the toast. Daniel raised his glass. To Florence Hale, visionary builder and eternal matriarch. And the ballroom, full of people who once kissed my hand, who once asked for favors, who once smiled in elevators and whispered praise behind closed doors, lifted their flutes and drank to my supposed death. I didn't feel sadness. I felt fire, the kind that doesn't burn skin, but memory. I had worked half my life to make sure Hale Estates stood for integrity. I sat on late-night calls during downturns. I paid off debts Charles never told me about. I approved hiring decisions, mentored interns, and personally called every widow who sold us their land to make sure they weren't pressured. And now, Daniel used my death to smooth over shareholders' nerves, to secure control, to make himself look noble. I watched as he hugged Ivy, his hand gripping her shoulder too tightly, his jaw clenched too hard. He wasn't crying. He was acting. And Ivy? I didn't know where she was anymore. There had been a time when she would have run across the street to find me, when she would have called the police, the mayor, or heaven itself if I had gone missing. Now she stood under chandeliers, drinking from crystal glasses, letting a lie unfold across white linen tables. I didn't blame her entirely. I knew what Daniel could do with words, with time, with money. I had seen it myself. But the ache remained, not for the betrayal, for the silence, for the fact that she hadn't even whispered, "I don't believe it." The event ended with a montage of music and photos. Ivy led the final walkout. Daniel followed, shaking hands. I turned off the screen. The judge had told me, "Wait, let them bury you in words first. Then we'll unearth the truth, with paper, with record, with law." But for now, I sat quietly, like a ghost in my own story. And I waited. I didn't knock when I walked back into my own home. The lock still recognized me. The door gave way without resistance, as if the house itself had waited, silent, watchful, patient. I stepped into the grand foyer where sunlight poured through beveled glass like a quiet blessing. Everything looked the same, yet everything had changed. My footsteps echoed softer than I remembered. There were no flowers waiting on the table, no welcome back, just the muted tick of the antique clock I'd restored myself and the smell of old pine wood and distant lavender. I placed my coat neatly on the rack and carried the briefcase to the study. Judge Lee arrived an hour later. He was older than when I last saw him, slightly hunched now, his hair fully silver, his eyes the color of smoked glass. But his presence had not changed. He still moved with that quiet dignity, the kind that comes not from pride, but from purpose. He didn't ask if I was ready. Instead, he sat across from me, opened the leather case, and laid out every document Charles had preserved under seal. The silence between us was not heavy. It was sacred. We worked through dusk, then past nightfall, beneath the soft yellow light of the lamp Charles once chose for the desk. Judge Lee handed me a page, then another. I read slowly, carefully, my breath steady, my fingers deliberate. Line by line, we traced the original will, every clause Charles had personally penned with his legal team, every contingency built with wisdom, foresight, and the exacting language only a man who loved too deeply and trusted too little could create. Then we moved on to the altered copies. What Daniel had submitted as the most recent revisions, Judge Lee didn't say much, but his pen tapped once for each inconsistency. Inheritance clauses moved subtly to include Daniel's name, power of attorney details redrafted, a quiet removal of provisions meant for our scholarship foundation, an erasure of safeguards that required co-signatures on property transfers, subtle, clean, almost elegant, but not invisible. We documented everything. Judge Lee initialed and signed every annotation. I countersigned. We attached exhibits, chronologies, a full audit trail. And still, I said nothing. Not because I had no words, but because women like me, we learn early that not all things need to be screamed to be true. I had once believed that to be heard, I had to soften myself, lower my voice, apologize before I spoke. I spent years making peace for others, tending to their needs, excusing their silence. But tonight, I didn't feel like a mother. I felt like a woman who had built, defended, and outlasted. The fireplace crackled beside us. I hadn't lit it in months, but tonight I needed something warm that had nothing to do with people. Just fire, just presence. Judge Lee leaned back, folded his glasses, and finally spoke. "Do you want me to be there tomorrow?" he asked. I looked at the envelope with the judge's seal, then at the papers now properly bound, then back at him. "No," I said calmly. "You've done your part. I'll take it from here." He studied me, then nodded once. "I underestimated you, Florence," he said. but Charles never did. That stayed with me. After he left, I didn't sleep. I walked through every hallway of the house, touching frames, smoothing curtains, checking the edge of the window panes like I used to after storms. Everything had a memory, a detail, a fingerprint of a life lived deliberately. I paused in the kitchen, where Ivy used to sit on the counter as a child, swinging her legs, stealing bites of frosting while I baked. Then the dining room, where Daniel had once proposed a toast to strong women who build empires. I'd smiled politely that night, even as something in me shrank. And finally, I stood in front of the mirror near the staircase, tall, gold-rimmed, heavy with time. I looked into my reflection, not searching for beauty or reassurance, but something simpler, recognition. And I saw it. I was not the woman who had been left behind in a locked villa. I was not the woman erased from the picture. I was Florence Hale. And tomorrow I would show them that the only thing more powerful than a woman's silence was the truth she chose to reveal, on her terms, in her time. Without shouting, without rage, just presence and proof. The door opened just past 7, sharp heels on polished marble, laughter too loud for that hour. Ivy's voice rose first, warm and artificial, followed closely by Daniel's familiar baritone, slick with performance. I remained seated. Across from me, Judge Lee didn't flinch. He sat in his dark gray suit, briefcase at his side, spectacles already perched on his nose, hands resting calmly on the thick envelope between us. The fireplace behind him cast a quiet glow, steady and indifferent. I looked down at my lap, where my fingers rested on the armrest like I was holding the edge of an invisible thread. I wasn't nervous. I was finished with nerves. Daniel came in first, a bottle of Dom Perignon still tucked under one arm, his blazer slung over his shoulder. Ivy followed, cheeks flushed, hair wind-blown, draped in the same cashmere wrap she used on our last vacation together. The moment they saw us, everything stopped. It was like time folded into itself. I watched Daniel's smile falter. First the eyes, then the mouth, then the casual tilt of his neck that always came before his best lines. He didn't say a word. Ivy froze mid-step, her heel catching slightly on the rug. Her eyes bounced between me and Judge Lee, then landed on the briefcase. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Judge Lee didn't rise. He simply reached into the briefcase, removed a sealed file stamped with the judicial crest, and placed it gently on the coffee table. "This," he said, adjusting his glasses, "is an official court order to freeze and secure all properties, accounts, and legal instruments connected to the Hale estate. Pending a full investigation into recent modifications and attempted fraudulent filings," Ivy inhaled sharply. Daniel didn't move. "I am reopening the original file," Judge Lee continued, unsealing the folder with deliberate calm. "The will signed by Charles Hale, filed under judicial escrow by my office and verified against his original legal counsel's records, remains legally binding and overrides all subsequent unauthorized versions I didn't speak." I had spoken enough in my silence. Daniel stepped forward. "There must be some mistake," he said, his voice suddenly tight. "I mean, Florence, surely we can talk about this privately." I met his eyes. "We already did, Daniel. You just didn't know it." He blinked, confused for a beat, then turned to Ivy. "This is absurd," he muttered, quieter now. Ivy was pale, not angry, not surprised, just pale. Like she had walked into a room where her childhood was waiting and found it irrevocably changed. "Ivy," I said gently, my voice calm as the wind before a storm, "did you know the will had been altered?" She hesitated. I watched her face wrestle with the impossible weight of answering. She didn't deny it. She didn't defend it. She just looked at me with those same eyes I used to soothe in the dark after nightmares, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I saw something break. I didn't. I didn't think it mattered anymore, she whispered. You were ready to let go. You said you were tired. I was tired, I said, but not of living. Tired of pretending that silence was safety, Judge Lee slid over a second file. All changes made after Charles Hale's death will be submitted for forensic review. There is sufficient evidence of tampering, coercion, and intent to defraud. All relevant authorities have been notified. This is not a negotiation. It's a restoration. Daniel opened his mouth again, but this time it was just breath. No more lines to charm his way through, no more rooms to control, just a woman and a judge, and the truth. I stood then, not for drama, not for emphasis, just to feel the ground under me, to take back the space I had once built, brick by brick, memory by memory, now almost stolen by the very hands I once cradled. I didn't bring cameras, I said, looking directly at them. No press. No lawyers in the shadows. Just the law. Just a conversation you both never thought I'd be a part of again. Daniel looked like he wanted to throw the champagne bottle. Instead, he set it quietly on the edge of the console table, as if the weight of it suddenly didn't belong to him. Ivy, I said again, there's still time to choose who you are. And for a brief moment, I thought I saw her hesitate, just enough to feel the ache of that possibility, but she didn't move toward me, not yet. Judge Lee began gathering the files. The next meeting is in chambers tomorrow morning. Attendance is mandatory, counsel optional but advised. No one argued. I walked to the window just as Daniel and Ivy turned to leave, their backs to me, their future no longer theirs to manipulate. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. I was already home, and this time, I was staying. I didn't want revenge. I wanted restoration. After everything, after the locked door, the forged filings, the hollow speeches beneath white flowers, I realized that dragging them into court would only extend the spectacle. I didn't need a courtroom to reclaim my dignity. I had already done that the moment I sat beside Judge Lee in my own home. Still, something had to change. Silence may have protected me once, but silence could no longer be my legacy. So I called for one final meeting. No champagne this time, no orchestral piano or curated lighting. Just a wooden table in the study, the same one Charles used to draft his earliest site plans. I asked Ivy and Daniel to come. Only Ivy showed up. She looked smaller, not in stature, but in energy. Her once perfect poise was subdued. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed them in her lap, waiting. Daniel had sent word through his attorney. No further contact. That was fine. His exit was not a loss. It was a correction. I cleared my throat, unfolded the document, and began. I'm not suing either of you, I said. I have no intention of dragging our family name through months of depositions and discovery, but I will not pretend this never happened. Ivy's eyes lifted, red around the rims. In accordance with the original will, Charles's true intentions, the estate will be placed entirely under the Charles Foundation, effective immediately. She stiffened. All of it? Yes, I said gently. Every property, every trust, every holding. But that, she swallowed, that includes the development shares, the board seat, the voting rights. I know what it includes. Her voice faltered. So what happens to us? I folded my hands. For the next 5 years, the foundation will be overseen solely by me. After that, if no further breaches of trust have occurred, the board may vote to expand leadership. Until then, all decisions flow through one channel. Ivy pressed her fingers to her mouth. I could see the panic rising in her eyes, and something else, something softer. Grief, maybe. Daniel, I added, will be removed from all positions immediately. His access to assets, properties, and personnel is revoked. She nodded, almost imperceptibly. She didn't defend him. Not anymore. I'm not doing this out of vengeance. I said, my voice steady. I'm doing it because integrity must have a spine. This family lost its way when it started treating legacy like a currency instead of a calling. Her tears began to fall then, silent and unguarded. I thought you were done, she whispered. You said you didn't want to fight anymore. I thought maybe you were tired. I looked her in the eyes. I was tired, I replied, but not of the legacy. I was tired of watching it rot. She bowed her head, shoulders trembling. Ivy, I said more softly, you can still be part of this. But not because you're my daughter, because you choose to be someone who builds instead of takes. She looked up, mascara streaking along her cheekbones. What do I have to do? I reached for a folder beside me. Inside were the bylaws of the Charles Foundation, along with a letter, handwritten. Start with this, I said. Volunteer for 6 months. No title, no pay. Work under the Foundation's programs anonymously. Learn who we serve. Sit with women who've lost everything and still rise. Stand in food lines. Teach children who've never known stability. She took the folder like it was glass. And then, she asked, then we talk. Not as mother and daughter, but as people who might still believe in the same horizon. She nodded slowly, tears spilling without resistance. And if I don't? She asked almost in a whisper. Then you will have walked away from something that was never taken from you, but offered back in grace. We sat in silence. The clock on the wall ticked evenly, as it had during all of Charles's late nights drafting zoning plans. The same room, the same air, but the spirit had changed. This wasn't about reclaiming power. It was about setting terms for peace, with conditions, because forgiveness is not blind. It must be earned, shaped through effort and cemented with humility. I stood, not out of dismissal, but closure. She stood too, and for a moment I thought she might reach out, maybe for a hug or a hand or just something small, but she didn't, and neither did I. Some distances must be walked alone. Later that evening, I sat by the window overlooking the garden Charles and I once planted. The azaleas were blooming again, soft and stubborn. I held the original will in my hands, now legally reaffirmed, and watched the wind move the branches like a silent applause from the past. Forgiveness, I realized, doesn't come with surrender. It comes with structure and boundaries, and sometimes the courage to rewrite what we once allowed to be erased. A week had passed since the announcement. The house had settled into a quiet rhythm, no longer haunted by echoes of betrayal, only filled with the gentle hum of restoration. I didn't expect a call from Ivy, and none came. But that wasn't the point. Some words are too fragile to say aloud. Some truths live better on paper, steady, unchanging, untouched by the swell of emotions. So I sat down one morning, placed a sheet of thick ivory paper in front of me, and began to write. I didn't write as the founder's widow. I didn't write as the woman who'd survived a locked door or stared down falsified filings. I wrote as her mother. No judgments, no recaps of pain, no recounting of what had been taken. Just a letter from one woman to the child she once held close, hoping that even now, perhaps especially now, there was still a thread between us. I folded the note with care, placed it in a linen envelope, and wrote her name in ink the same shade of plum I used on her first birthday invitations. Then I handed it to the housekeeper with a simple instruction. Leave this in her car. Passenger seat. She'll find it when the engine quiets. I didn't know how long she'd keep it sealed. Some envelopes are heavier than they look, but she did open it. And she read. She was sitting in the parking lot of the Foundation's headquarters. I had invited her, of course, to join orientation week, but I hadn't expected her to show up. And yet, there she was, in her car, still dressed in black, still carrying the ache of all that had come before. She hadn't stepped out yet. The envelope lay open on her lap. The letter inside, creased but intact, unfolded like a quiet moment from a long-lost time. She read, "My dearest Ivy, if you're reading this, it means something in you still pauses long enough to feel. That is enough. That is everything. A mother does not vanish, even when her name is erased from ledgers or her voice is drowned beneath applause that doesn't belong to her. I have been many things in my life: wife, architect, partner, witness, but above all, I have been your mother. And though I was once overlooked, please know I never once looked away from you. I remember the sound of your laughter echoing through the atrium of our first home. I remember the birthday you cried because the cake had the wrong color frosting, and how you later said it was the best cake you'd ever had because we ate it sitting on the floor. I remember when you said you wanted to be bigger than this house someday. And my answer then is the same as it is now. You already are, Ivy. You always have been. One day, you may hate me for the choices I've made, or maybe you'll understand why I couldn't stay silent. Either way, I want you to know this. A mother may be forgotten, but she never forgets. And I have loved you through every version of you, even the ones that forgot how to come home. If you ever wish to begin again, you know where to find me. No grandeur, no titles, just tea. Mom. When she finished reading, she folded the paper back slowly, holding it in her lap like it might fall apart if touched too hard. She didn't cry dramatically. There were no sobs or shaking shoulders, just one tear. It slipped down quietly, catching in the hollow of her cheek before dropping onto her coat sleeve. She didn't wipe it away. She let it stay. Because sometimes grief is not for what was lost, but for what might still be found. She looked out at the front steps of the foundation, at the open door waiting. And then, without a word, she placed the letter back in the envelope, opened the car door, and stepped out into the sunlight. I didn't watch from the window. I didn't need to. I felt it. A small shift in the wind, a thread tightening, not unraveling, a moment, not of reconciliation, not yet, but of possibility. And that, I've learned, is the most powerful thing a mother can leave behind. Not a fortune, not a name etched in marble, but a door left open. The house I live in now doesn't echo. It breathes. The walls are old timber, worn smooth by sun and time, and the kitchen smells of cinnamon and something always just out of the oven. It's not grand. It doesn't overlook a skyline, but it wraps around me like something that understands. It's not a mansion, not a legacy carved in stone. It's just a place to be. After everything, I chose to come here, a small farm tucked beyond the ridge, where the air is quiet and the roads forget your name. I don't own a driver anymore. No boardroom needs me. No press photos catch my smile. And still, I feel more alive than I have in decades. Every Tuesday and Friday, a group of women comes by. We sit under the awning in the back garden, hands covered in dyes and fabric threads, working through the kind of silence that heals. They're not strangers to pain. Some carry bruises you can't see. Others flinch when the wind slams a door too fast. But here, we stitch more than just cloth. We stitch memory back into the body. The program isn't official. No grants, no press releases, just word of mouth, a kettle that never empties, and a long work table filled with patience. Some call it Florence's porch, others just call it the place. It doesn't matter. What matters is the way they arrive, tentative, unsure, and the way they leave, a little taller, a little less afraid to take up space. Sometimes they ask what I used to do. I smile. I used to build buildings. Now I build mornings. They laugh. We laugh. And then we go back to weaving. I've taught them how to make paper from dried flowers, how to turn scraps into blankets, how to paint silence into something that doesn't ache. There's a rhythm to it now. The sound of scissors, the scrape of chairs on wooden floors, the steady pour of tea being refilled without asking. There are children, too. Their little feet thunder across the grass, chasing dogs and imaginary monsters. Their laughter fills the orchard like a hymn. One of them calls me Miss Flo. Another just runs up, hugs my knees, and then sprints off again like nothing happened. I don't ask questions. I just stay open. One morning, as I brewed the first pot of chamomile, I caught my reflection in the kettle. My face softer but not smaller. My eyes sharper but not bitter. My hair completely gray now, and I let it stay that way. No more hiding. No more apologizing for surviving. I remember asking Charles once, years ago, what he thought made a life meaningful. He said, "It's what you leave behind in people, not what you leave behind in banks." He was right. The Charles Foundation now funds dozens of quiet sanctuaries like this one. No gala, no plaque, just places where broken doesn't mean discarded, where being forgotten doesn't mean unworthy. Ivy wrote once, a letter, short, handwritten. I don't know how to say sorry yet, but I do know this. You were always the root I tried to cut because I thought growing up meant cutting loose. I see now, real growth is knowing where you came from and watering it. I placed it in the drawer by the window, not because I needed it to be seen, but because I wanted it close. Forgiveness is not a headline. It's a decision you make every day, like tending a garden. Quiet, repetitive, intentional. There's no orchestra that plays when peace arrives. It tiptoes in like morning fog, unnoticed until you realize you're breathing easier. Sometimes, when I sit out back with a blanket on my lap and the scent of lavender in the breeze, I think about what I lost, not the money, not the house, but the years I spent being quiet so others could be comfortable. Those years are gone now, and what's left is this, me as I am, unpolished and unafraid. I think that's what real freedom feels like. To be alone, but not lonely. To be still, but not stuck. To be older, but fuller. And as the sun dips behind the hills, casting long gold lines across the lawn, I hear laughter, somewhere between a child's squeal and a woman's sigh, and I close my eyes. It's not the life I planned, but it's the life I chose. And for the first time in a very long time, I know I am exactly where I'm meant to be. If you are reading this, perhaps you felt it too. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful, but hollow. The kind that creeps in after betrayal, after abandonment, after all the doors you once held open have quietly closed. For a long time, I believed my worth was tethered to usefulness. That if I longer built empires or solved problems for others, I would become invisible, as if love was earned only through labor and presence had to be justified. But I've learned something in the stillness of the after. You do not vanish just because someone stopped looking at you. You are not less, simply because you are no longer needed in the ways you once were. The world tells women like us that our chapters are finished, that our softness is weakness, that our silence is submission, that age is a closing door. But they are wrong. The truth is, survival is not passive. It is active, daily, and deeply defiant. Every breath we take after heartbreak is a quiet rebellion. Every morning we get up, tend to a plant, write a sentence, soothe a wound, or sit in solitude with a full heart. We declare, I am still here. They called me too soft, then too cold, too sentimental, then too controlling. They said I had nothing more to offer. But what they failed to understand is that a woman who has lost everything and yet chooses kindness is the most dangerous kind of woman of all. Because she no longer fears emptiness. She no longer clings to approval. She knows she can rebuild. Let them whisper. Let them underestimate. Let them imagine they've written your ending. It's not theirs to write. And if your hands are shaking, if your heart is tired, if the world tells you it's too late, remember this. You are allowed to begin again at any age. You are allowed to outgrow the people you once loved, the life you once molded, the roles you were forced into. You are not broken. You are becoming. I've walked through fire, some literal, some far worse in silence. I've watched the ones I loved most believe lies about me because they were easier to digest than the truth. And yet I never stopped loving. That is my greatest inheritance. Not the land, not the fortune, not even the foundation bearing Charles's name. It is the ability to remain soft in a world that tried to harden me. If I could say one thing to every woman standing at the edge of being discarded, it would be this: don't let anyone define you as a woman whose time has passed. They may abandon you, betray you, attempt to erase you, but you must never abandon yourself. Never hand over your voice in exchange for peace. Never trade your boundaries for belonging. Never forget that quiet strength is still strength. And when they close the door, thinking you won't survive, build your own. Better yet, build a table and fill it with others who've been forgotten. We are not relics. We are roots. And the future, whether they see it or not, is being nourished by us in secret. So if today feels too quiet, too empty, too far from who you used to be, know that there's another woman out here in a small house with mismatched mugs and a porch full of laughter who once felt exactly the same. She didn't disappear. She chose to become something new, and she's cheering for you with all the love I never stopped carrying, Florence.